already shown us how quickly those promises get tossed on the cutting room floor. The Washington Post just reported that before Mr. Obama has even taken the oath of office, his proposal for a tax credit for job creation, which he had touted on the campaign trail, has been dumped from the economic stimulus package now under construction. But in addition to specific programs or proposals, President Bush has worked hard to get us to think differently, to shift paradigms, to reorder our understanding of America, the world, and our relationship to it. That is more qualitative than quantitative. And perhaps it is harder to measure with numbers or notches on a board somewhere, but it is as much a part of leadership and vigilance that is necessary to keep this republic as anything else. We are in the 8th year since the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. What a way for a president to begin his first term. The world changed, and America changed with it. Previous generations saw the struggle against global communism define much of what America did and how we did it. Today, it is the struggle against global terrorism. It may have begun in earnest with President Bush in office, but it will continue long afterward. And so national security has defined the Bush presidency. Not simply the subject of national security, but the reality of national security. From retooling the Department of Justice and FBI, creating the Department of Homeland Security, revamping the intelligence community, to engaging dozens of other nations and liberating millions in the Middle East, President Bush took bold steps to confront this new international menace. In short, he led. President Bush has sought to lead us to think differently about war and terrorism, and to understand both that terrorism is a global threat and that freedom is terrorism's worst enemy. He has said throughout his presidency that freedom comes from God and is a universal human right. Freedom is better than tyranny. Liberty is better than oppression. I am so grateful that President Bush refused to accept this moral equivalency nonsense, that one way of life is just as good or bad as the next. Not only does that view make no sense on its face, but with it, no one would ever see liberation from disease, hunger, slavery, or deprivation. That is a philosophical perspective, to be sure, and perhaps it is difficult to communicate in the 21st century. Perhaps it does not lend itself to a text message or a posting on Facebook. But where you start determines the road on which you travel and where you eventually arrive, both for individuals and for nations. President Bush told the American Enterprise Institute last month that a president's job is not only to tackle problems, but to look over the horizon, sometimes far over the horizon. That is real leadership. Now let me move to some of those concrete accomplishments. Though some may wish to forget it, I remember when so many dismissed President Bush's strategy in Iraq that we have come to call the surge. Once again, he was thinking outside the box, changing the way we think about dealing with challenges and problems. The surge was more than simply sending more troops to Iraq, but implemented a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy. It provided for one of the most dramatic comebacks in the history of modern warfare. In less than 2 years, what some had said was a hopeless situation saw an 80% reduction in violence. Cities and provinces whose names were literal synonyms for violence, Ramadi, Fallujah, Baghdad, and others, are now largely free of al-Qaeda's operatives. And let me proudly say at this point that President Bush has reaffirmed our sacred commitment to our veterans. His administration has more than doubled funding for veterans' medical care, cutting the time to process disability claims almost in half, and reducing homelessness among veterans by 40%. It is, of course, much easier, much more natural to think about what has happened rather than what has not happened. This is true for many reasons, not the least of which is that We often simply do not know what has not happened. But think about this. We do know that America has not been attacked since September 11, 2001. That is 88 months. I know that no one listening to me speak is foolish enough to think this is because the terrorists, the terrorist networks, the terrorist movement at work today, that they have simply lost interest. No one is foolish enough to think the terrorists have just moved on to other things. No, they want more than ever to attack and destroy this country, if only because their first attack failed to bring us down. It has not happened in more than 7 years. President Bush's leadership has helped prevent another attack. His leadership in creating an international coalition and working with other individual nations in transforming and redirecting intelligence and law enforcement agencies has helped prevent another attack. We have fought over these issues here in Congress, and I, for one, agree with President Bush that we must, for example, monitor international communication involving suspected terrorists if we are to protect ourselves. Doing so is both necessary and constitutional, and I am glad that President Bush stood firm on these principles. President Bush has also helped protect us here at home by reducing the threat of rogue nations or groups launching a missile attack against the United States. President Bush fielded an operational missile defense system, which will require additional investment and development. But because of his leadership, we've already developed significant anti-ballistic missile capability both on the ground and at sea. Also looking abroad, President Bush has led us to rethink how we approach foreign aid with a new model of assistance to other countries. He signed Millennium Challenge account agreements with nearly a dozen African nations and put more emphasis on holding governments that receive our aid accountable for how they treat their people and whether they promote economic growth. This approach actually invites competition, utilizes criteria, and requires progress. And it requires a strong link between our security objectives, accountability, and foreign assistance funding. Linking these together serves both American and foreign interests better, and it took bold leadership to shift into this new way of approaching foreign assistance. In his 2003 State of the Union address, President Bush introduced the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR. Now, I happen to have been very interested in that and worked hard to get that done too, because along with Senator Kennedy, we're the author of the 3 anti-AIDS bills. So I take a great interest in what he's done, and he's the first to have really done it. This program focuses on both prevention and treatment of HIV/AIDS and care for the afflicted. Billions of dollars have already gone to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS and opportunistic diseases such as malaria and tuberculosis that often kill people with AIDS. This program has prevented HIV transition from mother to child during more than 12 million pregnancies and provided antiretroviral drugs for nearly 2 million people, up from only 50,000 receiving such drugs when the program began. PEPFAR has helped support care for nearly 7 million children and more than 33 million counseling and testing sessions for men, women, and children. This program, launched by President Bush, which was reauthorized last year with increased funding, is the largest international health initiative in history dedicated to a single disease. Shifting the focus to right here at home, even though the downturn of last year has been severe, it was preceded by 52 months of job creation. Productivity in his first term grew at the fastest rate in more than half a century. Before the recent spike, the average seasonally adjusted unemployment rate during President Bush's tenure was the lowest in 60 years. President Bush cut taxes for every American who pays taxes, doubled the child tax credit to help American families, provided marriage penalty relief, and began phasing out the estate tax.